Or the people who remembered to do something with their clocks. We come together to renew our faith in the holiness, goodness, and beauty of life, to reaffirm the way of the open mind and the full heart, to rekindle the flame of memory and hope, to reclaim the vision of an earth more fair with all her people one. Welcome this morning. I'm Reverend Michelle Buheit, which many of you here know, but for the folks that are tuning in online may wonder who this person is. And I'm the minister of this congregation. My pronouns, which I offer to create a truly inclusive and brave space for all to live into the fullness of their identities, are she and her. We're so glad that you have chosen to be here in person and virtually, and later, since this will be living on our YouTube channel, so it can be accessed at any time. Today is our monthly Cinema Sunday, where we together watch a documentary that is in alignment with our UU values, and then we follow that up with a time for conversation. In addition to conversation here in the chapel in person, there will be a Zoom opportunity on Tuesday evening, so watch your email for the Zoom link if you'd like to be part of that. For those here in the chapel, there is an alternate activity in the Amherst room where the folks in Faith Development are hosting a no-sew scarf project. And if you're wondering what a no-sew scarf project looks like, this is a no-sew scarf. Fleece is magic. It doesn't fray, so you don't have to sew it. And so we are making bunches of these to be able to put out in our clothing ministry, which is out by the pantry. Because as we know, even though spring is on its way, it's still cold. So if you would like to be working on this during the service, you would just go to the Emerson room, which is just behind this space. And that will also continue after the service. So if you want a little of everything this morning, you came to the right place. We can do that. We begin our time together by lighting the chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. Marlena, can I ask you to light that? Our chalice lighting words come from Leslie Takahashi. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a greater generosity of spirit, and a deeper joy in this life we share. Thank you. It's been said that Unitarian Universalism is the religion that puts its faith in you, trusting each individual to engage in the spiritual journey and to reach our own conclusions about spiritual matters. We do that in beloved community, and we support one another in faith and friendship. In that spirit, this congregation has created a covenant, a sacred promise of how we will aspire to be with one another. And I invite you to share our covenant words together. Together we promise to gather in compassionate community, to celebrate diversity of thought and unity of spirit, and to for ourselves, our children, and our world. As we gather, we acknowledge that our church is built on occupied land that once belonged to the First Nations people of this region, the Haudenosaunee, and the Neutrals before them. May we be good stewards of the land and courageously cultivate community with all living things. And now we gather.
Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong body, gathered here in the struggle and the power, Spirit draw near. Gathered here in the mystery of the hour, gathered here in one strong
Each of us carries with us into this time cares and concerns, joys and sorrows. Perhaps there is someone on your heart. Perhaps you yourself are struggling. Together we create the container where we can bring those cares, concerns, joys, and sorrows and put them down, if even for a short time, knowing that they are held in loving care by this gathered community. For those joining virtually, I invite you to speak the names aloud and give voice to that which is on your heart, or perhaps you might type it into the chat. For those here in the chapel, I invite you to come forward as you will and place a stone or a shell on the table labyrinth in honor of what you bring today. Please join me in a communal response. I am one and you are many. In this gathered community, we hold one another in love. And today we also will light a candle of sorrow and concern for the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia who suffer through the actions of one man and those who serve him. We include in our circle of compassion and care all who are impacted by acts of aggression and terror. We pray for peace and compassion in our war-torn world. And again, we respond. In this gathered community, we hold the world in love. So today is Cinema Sunday. And our documentary that we'll be watching is about 30 minutes long, so we will have plenty of time for some conversation following it. And as I said, you'll also have another opportunity virtually online on Tuesday evening. The documentary is entitled Fools and Dreamers, and it can be found on the website filmsforaction.org. The film follows really one man's vision for reclaiming the land. And as I was previewing it, I could not help but make the connection to our land and the invasive species that have sort of choked the back portion of our land for so long, and that we have been, just in the last few years, really putting a lot of energy into reclaiming that land, in addition to, the trails that have been there for a very long time. And I'm so grateful to Roger and to others who have helped maintain those trails over the years. but we're really seeking to reclaim and be good stewards of that land. So with that sort of introduction, I hope that you're able to take this in sort of through that lens. It's not just a passive, oh, isn't this interesting what this man has accomplished, but isn't this inspiring for how we might also be good stewards? And so I bring to you Fools and Dreamers.
I think they basically thought we were naive greenies from the city. I'm sure they thought that we had come here with all these ideas, and within a year or two we'd find it was all just too hard and it wasn't happening, and we'd go again. Here we are 31 years later. And it's interesting because I don't think there's a single farmer around us who may not be completely believing what we're doing, but I don't think there's a single farmer who's not backing Hinawai now. I think it was in about October 1987, we wrote an article for the local newspaper, which is called the Akaroa Mail. I just thought we'd let the community know what we were doing here. It was interesting because we wrote this article, and then a few weeks later we got this amazing response from one of the farmers. I can read you that article if you like. So, it was a much longer article than this, but I said in the article, my secret dream is that one day a whole catchment from Summit Crest to Sea, from Snow Tussock to Nicol Palm, from Solmesia to Mamaku tree fern and yellow-eyed penguins could be set aside for nature to reassert her original covering. That's what I said in the article. And then this is a response from one of the farmers. Again, I'm only reading the last two paragraphs. This is a farmer who lived in the next valley on a gorse-infested farm which he had been trying to fight all his life. And he said, I am all for saving patches of bush, but the thought of starting from scratch on land that is clear enough to be used productively frankly appalls me. As for shutting up a whole valley, heaven help us from fools and dreamers. I love that. I regard that as a great compliment, because we need a few more fools and dreamers in the world, I think. So here we are on Hinawai Reserve. We're in the southeast corner of Banks Peninsula, which is on the east coast of the South Island, jutting out into the Pacific. The amazing thing about New Zealand, I think, is how recently people got here. Across the Tasman Sea, 60,000 years ago, when the Aboriginal people reached Australia, and only about 800 years ago, until amazing Polynesian voyagers finally hit the biggest landmass in Polynesia and settled here. The first named group we know of is called Waitaha. Another wave of settlement came called Ngāti Māmoe from the North Island. And then in about 1700, the Ngaitahu or Kaitahu came southwards from the North Island again. Then, of course, Pakeha came. Pakeha, the European settlers from the other side of the planet, they arrived here. All these waves of human settlement had a huge impact ecologically, as you can imagine. At the beginning, Banks Peninsula was forested from side to side and from top to bottom, an ancient old-growth forest. Both Māori and European settlement had a huge impact on the forest. So by 1900, less than 1% of the old-growth forest was left. So Henua Reserve, it's a result of the Morris White Native Forest Trust. We look after 1,500 hectares. It's quite a big area, several catchments. The whole idea was to make it possible for nature to speed up the regeneration of the native forest and restore the native biodiversity as much as is possible, because we've lost some things altogether. Conservation was our first goal, to restore the biodiversity on which we're all completely dependent. We sometimes forget that. Some people say, well, why are you restoring the forest? In a way, saying why are you doing it is like saying, why should you love your mother? That's sort of parallel. We're totally dependent on vegetation and the wildlife it supports for our own lives. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for plants and vegetation and animals and birds and so on. So our prime goal is conservation, but from the very beginning we decided that people would be able to come here freely and whenever they wanted, without asking, could just come and walk our tracks. And there's many kilometres of walking tracks now. So it's really like a little mini national park, right on the doorstep of Akaroa itself. So there's two centres of settlement, if you like. The house we're in now is my post-earthquake house. Previously I lived in an older house just about 100 metres away across to the east. And that was somewhat damaged in the big earthquakes of 2010 and 2011. Andrew, who's been a trustee, came to work here with us several years ago, and he lives during the week in my old earthquake-damaged house and goes home to his wife Suzanne in the weekends. And then on Tanarito Homestead, Paul and Tricia live down there, and it's about 1 hour's walk away.
The nest is on the power pole up there, and there's a few of them, but I can't work out how many.
This is Hinawai Stream, the first crossing. This is permanent flow here. Even in the driest of drought years, we've never lost our flow in the largest streams. And it's amazing when you think of it, because a lot of people think of Banks Peninsula being a sort of an open, dry, grassy place, but this is really what Banks Peninsula is and was. And the water is a very prominent part of it. We just keep finding new waterfalls as we explore more. This is one of the first ones we found. It's right on the main track, so everybody sees this. We put a little 1-minute track off to it. It's called Fuchsia Falls. It's only one of about 47 waterfalls across the whole of Hinawai that we've found so far in name.
You can't meet Hugh and not just like him. Hugh's the boss and he's the day-to-day manager of the reserve. He gets up every day, he has the same routine and he goes to work. And work is hard. We don't use vehicles to get to work, so the work site might be 2 hours walk away. And so 2 hours after walking to work, you start work and you work all day and then you walk home for 2 hours. And when he gets home, he'll have his bath and have his dinner. And from about 7 o'clock or 7:30, he's ready for his evening. And so he sits at his table and he starts working. And he does all the paperwork involved with Hanawai. He writes letters, he writes submissions, he writes and he writes and he writes. And the next day he gets up and off he goes again. He's amazing. It's his life. It's his dream.
Stop you and get too difficult. From a very, very early age, I was walking on Banks Peninsula. I remember getting very interested in bird life, and I thought, grow Banks Peninsula plants in the back garden of our family home. I just got so fascinated by the way plants grew. Just everything about plants just completely caught my fancy. It was interesting at university because I had decided from the very beginning to do both arts and science. And it was botany I went on with, really. So for several years I'd been tramping on a regular systematic grid pattern of sampling across Banks Peninsula, doing in much greater detail than ever been done before a detailed botanical look at the peninsula. And then as I was doing this, I was thinking, gosh, I thought it had been completely trashed, but there's so much still here, a lot of it coming back. So all this made me think, I'd love to look after a bit of this land and let this all happen. And amazingly, I was introduced to this guy called Maurice White. He'd set up a fund to purchase land for conservation purposes on Banks Peninsula. He said, would you be interested in being involved? And I think I waited about half a nanosecond and said yes. We started looking for land, and I kept my eyes sharp open. And on this particular bit of land, which was the original part of Hanawai, 109 hectares, I said to Maurice, look, this is ideal. It's a reasonable size, but not huge. It's got old growth forest on it, so we can see what the end result would be of a regeneration program. And it's basically uneconomic in marginal hill country, which really shouldn't really be farmed at all. September 1987, we bought that land. 4 years later, it became hugely bigger because we had the opportunity to buy Old Tamariko Station, which was right next to us, and that made it 10 times bigger. The local community was a bit suspicious about what we were doing, I have to say.
All the farmers in the area thought he was a total nutter.
When I first heard of the fact that Hugh and the Trust were going to use gorse to help regenerate the natives, I was a sceptic of it.
They went, no, he's going to let gorse grow. You can't let gorse grow. I come from a rural background. Gorse is a weed. You get rid of gorse. You burn it, you poison it, you bulldoze it, but you get rid of gorse.
Gorse is a terrible, terrible weed for pastoral farming. It's shocking. And no one, let alone me, would deny that. But it's also, almost nothing is black and white, is it? If you've got it and it's sort of infested the landscape irretrievably, in a way, it's worth looking at its good points and seeing, well, maybe we don't have to fight it. On this marginal hill country, fighting it usually makes it worse, because that's what gorse thrives on. So we said, no, we're just going to leave the gorse alone on this gorse-infested pasture. We don't want pasture, we want native forest to regenerate, and gorse is a wonderful nurse canopy for native forest regeneration. It's an opportunistic plant. It takes advantage of cleared ground and forest climates, but it can't stand shade. It has to have full sunlight. So as soon as it's shaded, it's dead. So it grows quite fast in the full light, but then other things come in underneath it, naturally. Shade-tolerant hardwood trees, for example, and they just thrive under the gorse shelter. The gorse is a nitrogen fixer, so it's actually fertilising the soil all the time, with nitrates a very important nutrient for plant life. This is old man gorse here with a few natives. Often it's thicker than this, sometimes it's thinner than this, but eventually all these natives come up under here. The one that's probably the most abundant one of all is mahoi or waiki wood, which we can see here. It thrives under the shade, but once it gets its head up, it loves the sun as well. So as soon as the head's up above into the light, it's shading the gorse, and the gorse dies. As all these lower parts of the gorse is all dead because it's shaded.
I initially thought that the progression from gorse to native trees would take 50 years, but in 10 years you could see it. You could see them coming up through the gorse in areas that I didn't realise that there would be natives growing.
Now, of course, you're not getting pasture back, but you're getting native forest back with all its benefits. Increased benefits now with carbon sequestration, as well as all the ecological and biodiversity values that are being fostered this way. Our whole philosophy is what I call minimal interference management. People have an inflated opinion of what Homo sapiens is capable of. I hate to say this because I'm a Homo sapiens as well. But we're really good at damaging things. We're not all that good at putting things right. But all the serious work of natural regeneration of native forest and wildlife has been done by nature. People say to us, "Are you planting all this forest back?" And it's a sensible sounding question, but really if we were planting this forest back, we'd never do it. On 1,500 hectares of land, of wild, hilly, rough terrain, we'd never do it. Nature has planted the forest back in totally ecologically appropriate and scientifically interesting ways. There's millions of hectares of productive farmland in New Zealand on good soils on easy terrain. But then there's also, let's say, millions of hectares also in marginal hill country that are not actually that productive, but with our farming ethic we sort of think it's clear the forest, we should keep farming it and producing food. And of course we need to produce food. We all have to eat. So we're all dependent on the farms producing food. Perhaps we could be a bit more sensible, maybe eat a little bit less meat and make it more efficient and environmentally friendly. But my idea, even New Zealand-wide, and particularly with the possibility of income now from this land as carbon sequestration, you stop trying to farm that land. You don't even plant exotic forests on it. For timber maybe, but certainly not for carbon sequestration. That's just replacing one ridiculous folly with another ridiculous folly. The scene is wide open for taking this marginal gorse-infested hill country and letting it just do what Hinawai is doing on a much grander scale and regenerating into native forest on its own. We don't have to plant this stuff. Nature's doing it. All we've got to do is take away the deleterious things that are stopping it happening fast. As well as sequestering carbon, you get all the other benefits. You get the huge biodiversity on which we're totally dependent as well. And we also share the world with all the other species that have evolved as well. That's a crucial thing we tend to forget about. got to be reasonably deep because we don't want it too high up. Where do you want it? Yeah, in the middle.
Everything's done very slow here. People walk. Paul and I will use a vehicle, but Hugh doesn't use a vehicle. He'll cycle or he'll walk. So he doesn't believe we should be using fossil fuels. And instead of saying don't use fossil fuels, he just rides his bike. And he'll use public transport.
I'm a technological person like anyone in the modern world. I have a house with electricity. My hot water is heated by the sun, by solar panels on the roof, but I don't have photovoltaic cells to create electricity here. And we are on a national grid here. So that's quite a big technological thing. I have a landline telephone. I don't have a cell phone. It wouldn't be pointless anyway because we're out of cell phone range here, thank goodness, thank heavens. I'm not against all this technology. I'm not anti it, but I don't want it. I'm very happy with the level of technology I have here. I do see, unfortunately, that uncritical acceptance of a lot of this technology, we're losing a lot of our old skills and artistic and creative satisfaction. I really do feel that quite strongly. So I'm not in a sort of mood to just roll with the tide and take on all this technology, which I think is unnecessary for me and actually not all that good for the community, to be honest. It has wonderful advantages as well. And some of the things that technology produces, I'd be the first to praise. I mean, the bicycle, for example, I regard as the peak of transport technology. And it's technology, and I love it. I love my work here, and I meet innumerable people here. I'm not a hermit. I do interact with the rest of humanity, for sure. And love it. My roots are here. I get immense satisfaction from seeing what is happening here. Fire has always been our biggest fear, I'd say. In 2011, we had a major lightning strike here. So that morning was terrible. We actually saw the thunderstorm come over. It was almost a rainless thunderstorm in July. It was the driest winter we've ever recorded. So the conditions were like summer-like dry conditions here. And then this electrical storm came over. We saw the lightning strike come down, and it hit Full Moon Bluff across here on the high ridge. And it just exploded into flame. We had an immediate response. There was, I think, 7 helicopters, and the helicopters could barely fly that first day because of the wind. So it largely just kept burning. So I just said, look, we just don't know what it's going to do overnight. So I packed up what I could. It was one of the worst moments of my life. And was evacuated to Akaroa, jumped on my bike and rode to Akaroa. In the morning I woke up there, looked up, and the whole of Taraterehu, Stony Bay Peak, was just ringed with fire. And by that time the wind had died down, and then the helicopters could fly, and they took monsoon bucket after monsoon bucket out of Putakitaki Pond. But the interesting thing was, every time it was burning fast through gorse, every time it hit a bush edge, or a generated native bush edge, or even beech forest, old growth forest, just went out. So there was almost no native bush destroyed. huge areas of gorse with natives coming through, but was still largely gorse, that was burning hot and fast. So it burned, I think, for 27 hours. But it was very emotional for me. I came back the next morning to my house, found it still here. Fire was out. But the whole landscape in front of me was just blackened. It was just a complete nightmare. Yeah. I can still feel that emotion just almost leaping on me like a panther.
I think the community now, by and large, is absolutely in support of Hinawai. We realised that the way farming was done over the years had to be changed, and I think what Hugh has done has helped people realise that it can be done in a good way.
I think it's a really interesting time to be involved in conservation. There's this great groundswell now of people who are closing off whole gullies because it's uneconomical land, so they're letting the bush grow back, and they're fencing it off so that nature can be there, so that we can have these corridors, and so that the birds can move and the insects can move and things can get from the summit to the sea and over the hills to the next one.
Forestry alone won't save us from global warming because a lot of the sequestered carbon is locked up in fossil fuels. But even covering every inch of dry land in the world, the forest wouldn't sequester enough if we keep on burning the fossil fuels that have been sequestered for millions of years. So forestry is definitely part of the solution, but not the whole part. We have to change the way we use energy as well. In a big way, we have to do it really quickly or we're really stuck. No one person can solve these massive problems. So all you can do and all the universe can expect of you is to do your best. Your best can be in all sorts of different scales. We're doing our best here in terms of human life and the ecology and biodiversity and climate and other species sharing the planet with us. All those things.
Plant for the birds, plant for the bees. Grow a few flowers in your garden. It doesn't have to be as big as Hinawai.
So if people can look at Hinawai and say, gosh, this is succeeding in lovely ways, I'll do something in my own little corner of the world that draws some sort of inspiration from there. I'll be delighted with that. It's never been our intention. Our intention was just to do the right thing in this corner of the world. But if that's repeated over and over and over again, well, the possibilities are immense. The problems are immense, but the solutions are immense too.
I'm making a note to myself that in the future, if I use New Zealand films, I will put the closed captioning. It took my ear a long time to get to where I could understand them well. So I am going to take the microphone that has yellow tape around it, and I'm going to come around and let's have some conversation. We've got a little bit of time. Check. Am I using the wrong one? There we go. So if you do have something to say, you'll need to, since we're masked, You'll need to hold the microphone right up against your mask in order to be heard. Okay? So let's have some reflection on things that got stirred up for you. And, at the ground level, yes, it was very difficult to understand him sometimes, so we don't need to say that. Okay.
In the very end, when he said, yes, there are immense problems, but there are immense solutions, that really gave me hope. And to think about what we can do here, and this property is just marvelous. And I'd really like to know what are our native plants, because so many trees drop seeds, and I wonder if those are native or I should pull them up.
Yeah, and that's where we're very blessed to have a horticulturist as our director of faith development, because Angela can tell us what is native and what is, something that's been introduced to the environment that might be destructive. Anybody else have any thoughts, reflections? Yeah.
I'm Linda Grote. I just was wondering, how does he supports himself through his home, with solar. I mean, his home is fueled by things that are natural, and he's riding the bike. So, but other ways that he does that. I mean, that's his job. Is he paid for that? How do people sustain themselves when they're doing this kind of work? And where are the people that are doing it? How do they get where they are, I guess, to be noticed or to be able to pursue their, because obviously that's his faith, his faith is in his life and in his service. So, everybody I know is, pushing a job to feed a family.
That's a good point. I mean, there are practical things, and I imagine, there was the last screen, the last projection was, you can donate, and I'm sure that there must be grant money that sustains those kind of projects, because it benefits, everyone, not way past New Zealand, because he's changing, restoring a part of the earth, which has an impact everywhere. How would you like to walk 2 hours to work and then work all day, and then 2 hours home? There's no Ubers.
Every time I see a video like this of someone who's really doing transformative things for the planet, I think of all the small things that all of us can do. We're all now taking bags to the grocery store. I see over the years more and more Priuses in our parking lot. I see a lot of signs that at least as Unitarians we're starting to really accept that. We're composting here. We have our clothing mission, which now recycles clothing so that we're not putting more horrible things into our rivers and streams. But as a church, we probably could think about more things that we could do to make the planet safe.
Part of what has been driving our planning for a Living Green Expo is to be a leader in the community. To, having the landscaping goats here was a visible way of saying there are alternatives and we can be creative, and we want to be that place in the community that people look to and, well, what are those nutty UUs up to? Because, they're doing all these green alternatives. Maybe we should think about doing some of these. So, we're trying to extend beyond ourselves.
I think we need to send him to the tropical rainforest, which is being decimated at such a rate that pretty soon it's going to be gone. And that's such a key part of our whole ecology and environment.
Thank you.
I just, the theme at the end there where they had the forest fire, decimated the forest. But I guess, then later on we saw where the growth, was almost as much as it was before the forest fire. So whether it's the forest or your health, sometimes things go down, but there's always rebirth. So there's always hope, I guess. So.
Thank you. And I think one of the lessons that I take from, when he was describing how to stop fighting the gorse, that yellow plant, that just let some things happen naturally. It might take 5 years before things, grow up to put shadow on that, so then it dies. But, to stop the poisoning and all of that. That works for gorse. So far, it hasn't worked for buckthorn, which is what we have out back. But we are being creative. I mean, the goats loved it. They thought that was delicious. Okay.
I just thought it was so beautiful. The landscape was so beautiful, and the waterfalls at the beginning, it made me really want to go there and walk those tracks that he called. I thought that was really just lovely.
I was impressed by his not using technology, but then when the fire came, the helicopters had to come. So that's, there's that balance between technology. He said he likes it, that it gave him a bicycle, and it was, you can only, perhaps in our world today, you can only be so lacking in technology. Sometimes you have to embrace it for what it can do for you, like medicine and healthcare and replacing joints and stuff. It's a challenge.
Yeah, as he said, he's not a hermit, He hasn't shunned technology or humans. He's just found a way that is in alignment with his principles.
Last summer when Angela kind of urged planting out front of tomatoes and tomatillos, and they even planted potatoes over there, which I happened to be here the day they were harvested, and we each got to take a potato home. I think this is such a good example. For one thing, how many people helped plant potatoes as a kid? How many are aware of how they're planted, cared for? Did you ever pick potato bugs off the plants? Yeah, you put them and take a coffee can with you with water in it and goodbye. But yes, I thought it was a wonderful film, a wonderful reminder. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you all for one more.
As we look at what we're doing here, both in the backwoods, and we look at our facilities, there's a lot of questions as to what we can do here in our facilities, our buildings, to go forward to be environmentally correct in what we're doing. And I think this is a good start on both here as well as the backwoods, that we need to look at that.
Thank you for bringing it literally forward to our buildings. We do have a lot of interesting decisions to make, which is why we're doing the Church in 3D project over the course of this year, so that we can have an understanding of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, and how to get there in the best possible way. That's a real hand. Okay, I wasn't sure if you were stretching.
Well, I mean, it just makes me think, as I was watching, we have this huge space. Now we don't have a lot of people using it. And, the people that we're missing, the younger, like 20-somethings, 30, even the younger teenagers, they're not here. Do we need all that extra space? And what if we turned it all into a greenhouse kind of a thing that would give, that would give space for people to do active work, doing things that would matter? I don't know. I mean, that's just one piece of it. It could be one piece, but you could have other pieces that would somehow go into the values. But I mean, I think that the teenagers, in order to be hooked in here, we have to have some kind of purpose for them, and it has to be attainable, and it can't be looking like school. So as we think about what to do, those are the things that I think really matter right now to that. There's going to be kids that are going to find their way somewhere else because that's what they do at that time. And I think the 20s, maybe going into the 30s now, are like the building times of families, and they don't have a lot of time to do other things. So if there's something that they can do as a family that they can contribute, they can feel is purposeful, that would be something useful and engaging. But as we're looking at facilities and looking at things, we have to figure out how we're catering towards filling the need of people in a purposeful way. That's all. I don't even know what to say else, but that's.
Thank you. It's a good reminder that as Unitarian Universalists, we're pretty creative theologically. We understand that we can choose our own adventure, and we can extend that to our environment, our physical spaces, and how we relate to them. Thank you all for your reflections. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us in worship today, and I trust that the message you got was not so much the doom and gloom of what we often think of with the impact of human life on the planet and how we've had a destructive impact in so many ways, but more of a hopeful message of real live individuals can make a difference. And I think sometimes we forget that, and that we can have a larger impact than you would think that we could. A reminder that you can support the work and mission of this congregation with your financial contributions. Here in the chapel, there is a basket toward the back where we can receive your contributions. It's also possible to go on our website, uuamherst.org, and click on the giving link, or you can text your gift. Use that technology at 833-987-1968. And now I invite you to share our chalice extinguishing words with me. Marlena, would you? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of commitment. Fire of commitment. I'm all in commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. You can feel free to sing along if you would like. Travel light and travel easy till I see you once again. Travel light and travel easy, and remember I'm your friend. May the road run up to meet you as you leave your past behind. I will leave your love you gently, and I'll hold you in my mind. We do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel this way with us. So be swift to love and make haste to be kind. Go in peace.